morning bell rang at Crestwood Middle School, and the hallways filled with laughter, sneakers squeaking, and the usual chaos of students rushing to class. Among them walked two quiet boys, twin brothers, Malik and Mason, both dressed in clean but simple clothes. Their shoes were worn, their backpacks second-hand, and they always carried the same calm expression. They never bothered anyone, never spoke unless spoken to, and always sat together side by side, like shadows that didn't want attention but attention found them anyway. It started small. Whispers in the hallway. Snickers when they passed. "Hey, look at the Jungle Kids," someone said one day. The name stuck cruel and sharp like a thorn in their skin. The bullies thought it was funny. They said it loud enough for others to hear, laughing as the word spread like wildfire through the school. "Jungle Kids," they repeated again and again, turning it into a joke. Malik and Mason pretended not to care. They never talked back, never showed anger. They just lowered their heads and walked faster. Their grandmother had taught them that words only had power if you gave them power. "Let them talk," she used to say. You don't have to fight noise with noise. But no matter how much they tried to ignore it, the word still hurt. During lunch, they often sat at a corner table, eating quietly while the other kids laughed in groups. Sometimes they'd hear whispers behind them. They look like they came from the jungle. Maybe they sleep in trees. Do they even have electricity at home? The comments were stupid, childish, but cruel. The twins would glance at each other, a silent promise passing between them. Don't react. The worst part wasn't the insult. It was how invisible they felt. Teachers didn't notice. Students who saw what was happening looked away. No one stood up for them. The bullies, Brent, Tyler, and a few others, grew bolder each day because no one stopped them. They thought it was harmless fun. But for Malik and Mason, every word was another cut that they silently endured. At home, things were different. Their grandmother's small house smelled of old books, tea, and warmth. She was a strong woman. With silver hair and wise eyes, she had raised the boys since they were 5. After their parents passed in a car accident, she became their world every evening after school. She made them sit cross-legged on the wooden floor of their small living room. She would say, "Before you eat, you train." And they did. Every day without fail, they practiced punches, blocks, stances, and breathing. Their grandmother had been a martial arts instructor once. She taught them not just how to fight, but how not to fight. "Remember, boys," she would say, her voice calm and firm, "the goal is not to win fights, it's to win yourself. To stay in control when others lose theirs." The twins took her words seriously. They trained hard, with discipline that no one at school could ever imagine. Sweat would drip down their faces as they repeated kicks and punches. The old wooden floor creaked beneath their bare feet. Their grandmother would correct their form, sometimes gently tapping their shoulders or legs. "Balance," she'd whisper. "Patience after training." They would sit around the dinner table. "Eating rice and vegetables," she would always ask. "Did you walk away today?" And they'd nod. She'd smile proudly and say, "Good, walking away takes more strength than throwing a punch," but deep inside, Malik sometimes wondered, how long can we keep walking away? The next day at school, the teasing continued. Brent, the ringleader, was waiting by their lockers. He was bigger, louder, and loved attention. "Hey, Jungle Boys," he shouted, banging on their locker doors. "You got bananas for lunch today?" His friends laughed, slapping high fives. Malik stayed quiet. Mason gently tugged his brother's sleeve. "Ignore it," he whispered. But Brent wasn't done. He blocked their path, smirking. "Why so quiet? Lost your jungle drums?" Malik looked at him, not with anger, but with a cold calmness that made Brent pause for a second. "We're just going to class," Malik said softly. "Move, please," Brent scoffed. "Move." "Please," he mimicked in a mocking voice. "Oh, look at you, acting polite. Maybe you think you're better than us." Mason took a deep breath. "We don't think we're better than anyone," he said. "We just don't waste time on nonsense." That word, nonsense, made Brent's smile fade. He stepped closer, his tone growing darker. "You calling me nonsense?" Before things could escalate, a teacher walked by, and the twins took their chance to slip away. But Brent's glare followed them down the hallway. Later that day, in the cafeteria, the bullies sat at their usual table. Laughing and pointing, Malik and Mason ignored them, choosing instead to focus on their food. Mason muttered quietly, "They'll get bored eventually," Malik nodded. But part of him wasn't so sure. When they got home, Their grandmother noticed the tired look in their eyes. "They called you names again?" she asked gently. Malik sighed. "It's fine." "Grandma," she shook her head. "No, it's not fine, but remember what I taught you. You can't control their words, but you can control your response." That night, as the moonlight spilled through the window, the twins trained longer than usual. Every punch felt heavier, every breath deeper. Their grandmother watched silently, then finally said, "Someday people will see who you really are. But until then, stay strong, stay kind." The next morning, Malik looked at his reflection in the mirror. His jaw tightened. "One day," he whispered to himself, "they'll understand." At school, the same whispers followed them again. But this time, Malik and Mason didn't flinch. Their silence was no longer weakness, and it was control. Something deep inside them had shifted. The bullies laughed louder, unaware that the very boys they mocked were black belt fighters, trained warriors in disguise, and that sooner or later, fate would show them the true meaning of strength. The sun had barely risen when Malik and Mason woke up. The world outside was still quiet, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and blue. Their small wooden house stood at the edge of town, surrounded by old oak trees and the faint smell of rain. Inside, the air was filled with the sound of calm breathing, light footsteps, and the gentle creak of the floorboards. Before most kids even opened their eyes, the twins were already training. Their grandmother, Miss Clara, stood barefoot in the backyard, her posture straight and her eyes sharp despite her age. She wore a faded white karate uniform with a red belt tied tightly around her waist. Her voice was soft but firm. "Begin," she said, and the boys obeyed instantly. They moved in perfect harmony. Their punches were fast but controlled, their breathing steady. The sound of their feet hitting the old wooden boards echoed through the quiet morning. Miss Clara circled them slowly, her sharp eyes catching every mistake. "Balance, Mason," she said, tapping his shoulder. "Focus, Malik. Don't rush your strikes." They adjusted immediately, their faces serious. They had been training like this since they were 6. While other kids played video games or slept in, the twins learned about discipline, focus, and strength. Miss Clara always said, "Martial arts is not about hurting others. It's about mastering yourself." When they finished, both boys were drenched in sweat, breathing deeply but smiling. Miss Clara handed them towels and water bottles. "Good," she said softly. "But remember, the strongest fighter is the one who never starts the fight." Malik nodded, wiping his face. "Yes, Grandma," after breakfast. They changed into their school uniforms, simple shirts and jeans. Miss Clara brushed Mason's hair and smiled gently. "You two have kind hearts. But don't let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness." They nodded again, quietly taking her words to heart. At school, they were different from everyone else, not because of their color, but because of how they carried themselves. They never talked back, never laughed too loud, never fought for attention. While others bragged about new sneakers or video games, Malik and Mason stayed humble. Their silence made them easy targets, but it also made them strong in ways no one could see. That afternoon during gym class, something happened that made the twins' patience truly tested. The boys were playing basketball and Malik caught the ball and dribbled past Brent, the loudest bully in school. Malik scored easily. Brent's friends laughed and teased him. "You gonna let the jungle kid beat you?" one said. Brent's face turned red. As the game went on, Brent started playing rough. He shoved Malik's shoulder, tripped Mason on purpose, and whispered insults under his breath. Malik could feel anger bubbling in his chest. His fists tightened, his training echoing in his mind. Breathe, control, never hit in anger. When the bell rang, Brent bumped into him one last time, hard. Malik stumbled but didn't react. He simply picked up his bag and walked away. Mason followed, whispering, "You did the right thing," but that night, at home, Malik couldn't hide his frustration. "Grandma," he said, "why can't we just defend ourselves? Why do we always have to walk away?" Miss Clara looked at him calmly. "Because defending yourself and proving yourself are two different things," she said. "Defending yourself is strength, proving yourself is ego. When you use your power for the wrong reason, you lose your peace." Her words sank deep, but they didn't erase the ache. Malik looked down. "But they'll never stop." "Grandma," she smiled faintly, "one day they will. Not because you hurt them, but because you'll teach them." The next morning as they walked to school, the air was cool and the streets were quiet. Malik thought about her words. He realized that their training wasn't just about punches or kicks. It was about patience, about being strong enough to walk away when the world wanted you to explode. When they reached school, a group of students snickered as they passed. "Here come the jungle kids," one of them said. Mason's jaw tightened, but he kept walking. Malik glanced at them not with hate, but with quiet confidence. Deep inside, he whispered to himself, "They don't know who we are." During lunch, Brent tried again to provoke them. He knocked over their food tray, laughing loudly as everyone stared. The cafeteria filled with laughter, but Malik and Mason just picked up the mess and cleaned it silently. Brent frowned, confused by their calmness. "You don't even fight back?" he said. "What are you, cowards?" Mason looked up at him, his voice soft but steady. "No, we just don't waste our energy on things that don't matter." Brent laughed mockingly and walked away, but for the first time something in his face showed uncertainty. Later that evening, the twins trained again. This time with more intensity. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every movement was precise, controlled, their bodies moving as one. Miss Clara watched from the porch, a proud smile forming on her face. "You're ready?" she whispered under her breath, not to them, but to herself. They had learned not just how to fight, but when to fight. What no one at school knew, what the bullies would soon find out, was that these quiet, patient boys were not afraid. They were prepared. They had spent years sharpening their minds, strengthening their bodies and mastering their hearts. And the next time someone pushed them too far, the world would finally see the warriors hiding behind those calm eyes. The next week started like any other at Crestwood Middle School. The sky was cloudy, the air heavy, and the hallways filled with laughter and noise. Malik and Mason walked quietly to their lockers, trying to blend in as always. But the whispering hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown louder. Some students still called them jungle kids. Some just watched with smirks, waiting for the next moment to mock them. Brent, the ringleader, sat at the cafeteria table surrounded by his usual gang. Tyler, Jason, and the twins from the football team. He leaned back, spinning a pencil in his fingers. "You know what?" he said with a grin. "Those jungle boys think they're better than us, always quiet, always acting smart. I bet they're scared to fight." Jason laughed. "Scared? They probably never threw a punch in their lives." Brent's grin grew wider. "Then let's give them a reason to tomorrow after school behind the gym?" Tyler frowned. "What if they tell the teachers?" Brent chuckled. "They won't, they're too scared, and if they show up, we'll teach them a lesson." The boys laughed and slapped the table. The plan was set. They were going to humiliate the twins once and for all. The next day, everything felt off. The twins could sense the strange tension in the air. Students stared at them longer than usual, whispering to one another. When Malik sat down in class, a folded piece of paper landed on his desk. He opened it quietly. Inside, in messy handwriting, were the words "after school. Behind the gym. Don't chicken out." Mason saw it and frowned. "Ignore it," he whispered. "It's another trap," but Malik didn't respond. He just folded the note and placed it in his pocket. His jaw tightened, his heart wasn't afraid, and it was calm. Calm in a way that comes from knowing your own power. The school day passed slowly. Every tick of the clock echoed louder than usual. By the final bell, groups of students were already whispering. Some were excited, others nervous. Rumors spread like wildfire. "Brent's gonna fight the twin. You think they'll actually show up?" "Bet they'll run." When the last bell rang, Brent and his gang walked out confidently. Their laughter loud, their steps full of arrogance. Behind the gym, the ground was uneven, a forgotten patch of concrete surrounded by trees. By the time they arrived, at least 20 students had gathered, phones in hand, ready to record whatever was about to happen. "Think they'll show?" Tyler asked, kicking a stone. Brent grinned. "Oh, they'll come. They always walk right into it." A few minutes later, the twins appeared, walking side by side. Calm, quiet, and focused. The crowd went silent. The wind rustled through the trees. Malik's eyes met Brent's. Steady, unwavering. Brent smirked. "Well, look who decided to show up." He circled them slowly. "What happened, jungle kids? Finally got tired of hiding?" Mason spoke first, his tone calm. "We didn't come to fight, Brent. We came to tell you to stop." Brent laughed so hard it echoed. "Stop? You think you can just ask me to stop?" He stepped closer, inches away from Malik. "Or what?" Malik stood still, his eyes never leaving Brent's. "Or you'll find out who we really are," he said quietly. The crowd gasped at his tone, not angry, not scared, but steady like a warning. Brent's grin faltered for a moment, then he scoffed. You're bluffing. He shoved Malik's shoulder hard. Come on, show me who you really are. Malik didn't move. Mason's eyes narrowed slightly, their bodies still as stone. Brent shoved again. Do something, he yelled. The crowd laughed nervously. Some students looked uneasy now. Something about the twins' silence felt wrong. Not weakness, but something powerful. Brent took one last step forward. His fist raised. Fine, if you won't fight. He didn't finish in less than a second. Malik's body shifted and smooth. Precise, controlled, his arm moved like lightning, deflecting Brent's punch effortlessly in one swift motion. Brent's wrist was caught and twisted downward. Not enough to hurt, just enough to stop him cold, the crowd gasped. Before anyone could react, Mason stepped sideways, blocking Tyler's sudden attempt to jump in. His movement was graceful. One step, one pivot, and Tyler's balance was gone. He stumbled and fell wide-eyed. The twins didn't strike, didn't hit, they just moved. Every gesture was clean, perfect, disciplined. The crowd fell completely silent. Even the phone stopped shaking. Brent froze, his face pale. Malik slowly released his wrist and said quietly, We don't fight to prove anything, but if you try to hurt us again. Remember this moment? Brent stepped back. Stunned, his pride cracked, his friends were speechless. The crowd whispered, Did you see that? What was that? They move like pros. Malik looked around and said softly, Strength isn't about making people afraid. It's about knowing you don't need to. Then, without another word, the twins turned and walked away, calm and unbothered. Their silence said more than any punch ever could. Brent stood there, his heart pounding. The boy he had called weak had just taught him what real power looked like. Quiet, controlled, and unstoppable. That video, because of course someone had recorded it, would soon spread across the school by morning. But for now, in that quiet patch of dirt behind the gym, only one truth hung in the air. The bullies had tried to break the jungle kids, but instead, they had awakened two warriors trained in silence, shaped by discipline, and unshakable in spirit. By the next morning, the entire school was talking about what had happened behind the gym. The fight, or rather, the moment of silence that became a storm, had turned into a legend overnight. A single video clip had made its way across every phone. Every replay revealed the same thing. Malik and Mason had moved like trained fighters, calm, fast, and powerful. And yet they hadn't thrown a single punch out of anger. Students who once laughed at them now stared in awe. The jungle kids had become something else. Mysterious. Respected, untouchable in the cafeteria. The noise level was low. Groups of students whispered, Did you see how he caught Brent's arm? They didn't even look scared. They could have hurt him, but they didn't. The same kids who once joined in the bullying now avoided even making eye contact with the twins. Brent, however, sat alone for the first time in months. His usual gang was quiet, their laughter gone. He kept staring at his bruised wrist, not from pain but from shame. His pride had taken the hardest hit. Every time he remembered Malik's calm face, his stomach twisted. By lunchtime, even teachers had heard the story. One of them, Mrs. Daniels, approached the twins as they sat quietly eating. Malik, Mason, she said gently, Is it true what I heard? Mason looked up, his voice calm. We didn't fight, ma'am. We just defended ourselves. She nodded slowly. I saw the video. You boys showed discipline and restraint. That's something most adults can't even manage. Malik smiled faintly. Our grandmother taught us that fighting without control means losing yourself. Mrs. Daniels nodded with deep respect. She raised you well. But the story didn't stay contained in school. That afternoon, a parent shared the video online. The caption read, Bullies learned a lesson they'll never forget. Within hours, it began spreading. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. People were amazed not by violence, but by restraint. The twins' calmness had struck a chord with everyone. Back home, their grandmother, Miss Clara, was in the kitchen making tea when her neighbor, Mrs. Hill, rushed in holding her phone. Clara, you need to see this, she said breathlessly. Miss Clara adjusted her glasses. Watching the video quietly, her eyes softened as she saw her grandson standing tall, calm and controlled. When the video ended, she smiled gently. They remembered, she whispered. That evening, when the twins returned home, they were nervous. Malik spoke first. Grandma, we didn't mean to make trouble, it just happened. Miss Clara placed the teacup down. You did what you were trained to do, she said. You protected yourselves with honor. You didn't lose control. You didn't humiliate anyone. You showed them what real strength looks like, Mason exhaled. Relieved. We didn't even hit them, Grandma. She chuckled softly. You didn't need to, but fame, even small-town fame, comes with its own weight. By the next day, reporters had started calling the school. Wanting to know about the twin black belt boys, the principal called them into his office, a mix of pride and concern on his face. You two have made quite an impression, he said, but I want you to know. The world will watch how you handle this, Malik nodded. We're not looking for attention, sir. We just want peace, the principal smiled. That's exactly why people respect you. Outside the school, something unexpected happened. Brent was waiting by the steps alone. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets and his eyes looked unsure. When Malik and Mason approached, he took a deep breath. Hey, he said quietly, can we talk? The twins stopped. Watching him carefully, Brent looked down, his voice breaking slightly. I was wrong. About everything, he said. You didn't deserve how I treated you. I called you names, made fun of you, tried to make you feel small. He swallowed hard. And you still showed me mercy. Malik and Mason glanced at each other, then Mason stepped forward. We're not angry, Brent, he said gently. We just wanted you to stop, Brent nodded slowly. I get it now, I really do. His voice cracked again. You could have destroyed me that day, but you didn't. I'll never forget that for the first time. The three boys stood together, not as enemies, but as equals. The silence between them was heavy but peaceful. That evening, Malik and Mason sat on the porch with Miss Clara. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold. The wind carried the soft sound of crickets. Malik looked at her and said, Grandma, everyone's talking about us now, it feels strange, she smiled. It's not the world's noise that matters. It's your heart's quiet. Remember that? Mason leaned against the porch railing. Do you think Brent really changed? Miss Clara nodded. When you show someone respect instead of revenge, you plant a seed, give it time, it will grow. The twins exchanged a look, realizing that maybe, just maybe, what had happened wasn't just about standing up for themselves. It was about changing someone else too. And while the town buzzed with admiration and talk of the Black Belt twins, the brothers felt something deeper than pride. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes when you know you didn't have to hurt anyone to prove your strength. But little did they know, this was only the beginning, because soon, someone unexpected would come looking for them. Someone who had seen their video online and wanted to meet the boys who showed the world that true power doesn't roar, it whispers. The morning sun crept through the blinds of the small wooden house. Malik and Mason sat at the kitchen table, eating breakfast while Miss Clara hummed softly by the stove. The smell of oatmeal and cinnamon filled the room. Life felt calm again, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. As they finished eating, Miss Clara's old phone buzzed. She frowned and wiped her hands on a towel before picking it up. Her eyes widened slightly. It's a reporter, she murmured. From the city. The twins froze. A reporter? Malik asked, confused. Yes, Miss Clara said. They saw your video online. They want to come here today. Mason's spoon fell into his bowl with a soft clink. Why us? He asked. Miss Clara smiled faintly. Because, my boys, the world has seen something it doesn't see very often anymore. Strength with humility. That afternoon, a small white van parked outside their house. A woman in a blazer stepped out. Followed by a cameraman, she introduced herself kindly. I'm Rachel from Channel 7 News. We'd love to tell your story, not about a fight, but about the lesson you taught everyone. Miss Clara welcomed them in politely. The twins sat on the couch, shy but respectful. Rachel smiled warmly. You two could have hurt those boys, but you didn't. Why? Mason glanced at Malik, then answered softly. Because Grandma taught us that winning doesn't always mean fighting, Malik added. Sometimes strength is walking away when everyone expects you to explode. Rachel nodded, clearly moved. That's rare, she said quietly. Most people only know how to fight back, not how to stay calm. The interview lasted only 20 minutes. But by evening it was everywhere, the news, social media, even local papers. The headline read, Black twins show the world what real strength looks like. Grace, not violence, messages poured in from across the country. People called them heroes, inspirations, and role models. The video views crossed 500,000 in just 2 days. At school, the atmosphere completely changed. Students who used to ignore them now waved. Teachers smiled proudly. Even Brent, the bully who once tormented them, started eating lunch with them. When someone asked if it felt strange to forgive him, Malik just said forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. But as their fame grew, new challenges appeared. Some students whispered behind their backs again. They're just acting innocent to look good. They're trying to be famous. Malik heard it once in the hallway, but didn't react. He knew fame came with judgment one afternoon. The principal called them into his office again. "Boys," he said kindly, "I received an email from the National Martial Arts Association. They want to invite you to a youth demonstration event to showcase not just your skill, but your discipline." The twins looked at each other in disbelief. Mason whispered, "Us?" "Yes, you," the principal said proudly. "They saw your story. They said your behavior represents the true spirit of martial arts." Miss Clara was overjoyed when she heard the news. She hugged them both tightly. "Your parents would be so proud," she said softly. "You're showing the world that power means nothing without purpose." Weeks passed quickly. The day of the event arrived. The hall was huge, filled with judges, students, and martial arts masters from across the state. Banners hung high that read, "The Spirit of Discipline National Youth Showcase." Malik and Mason stood on the mat in their crisp white uniforms, black belts tied neatly around their waists. Miss Clara sat in the front row, her eyes glistening with pride. When it was their turn, the twins bowed to the judges, then in perfect sync, they began their demonstration. Every move was sharp yet graceful. Punches flowed into kicks. Spins melted into calm stances. Their performance wasn't about showing off power, but about control. The crowd watched in silence, mesmerized. When they finished, they bowed again. The entire hall erupted in applause. Even the Grandmaster stood and clapped. "Discipline, humility, and honor," he said. "That's what true martial artists look like." After the event, reporters surrounded them again, asking questions. Malik smiled and said, "We don't fight to prove we're strong. We fight to remind others that kindness is strength too." When they returned home that night, the stars were bright and the air was still. Miss Clara sat on the porch, her old eyes glowing with pride. "My boys," she said softly, "you didn't just defend yourselves. You defended dignity." Malik sat beside her. "Grandma," he asked quietly, "do you think people will ever stop judging others like they judged us?" She sighed, looking at the stars. "Maybe not all at once," she said. "But every act of grace lights a small candle in the dark. And you two just lit one big enough for the world to see." The twins smiled, leaning against her shoulders. The world around them was louder than ever. But inside their little home, peace lived quietly, just as it always had and far away on a glowing screen. The world kept watching the same clip over and over. Two boys standing calm in the face of hate, not to win a fight, but to win respect, without ever throwing a punch. The morning after the event, Malik and Mason woke up to the sound of birds singing outside their window. The air felt lighter somehow, as if the world itself was proud of them. Miss Clara was already up, humming softly in the kitchen as she brewed tea. The sunlight poured gently across the table, touching the gold medal that now hung near the wall. It wasn't just a medal for performance. It was a symbol of respect. On it were engraved the words, "For embodying true martial spirit, strength through humility." Mason stared at it for a moment. "Grandma," he said softly, "do you think this will change anything?" Miss Clara smiled knowingly. "Change begins small, my boy. Like drops of water carving stone, you've shown the world that being strong isn't about fighting back. It's about knowing when not to." Later that day, the twins went back to school, expecting everything to be the same. But this time, when they entered, something was different. The halls went quiet. Students smiled, nodded. Some even clapped softly as they passed. Malik and Mason exchanged a quick glance, unsure how to react. In the classroom, Brent sat near the window. He turned as they entered and raised a hand awkwardly. "Hey," he said quietly. "I saw the video from your event. You were amazing," Malik smiled. "Thanks, Brent." Mason nodded. "Glad you liked it." For the first time, there was no tension between them. The space that once held hate now carried respect. During lunch, something unexpected happened. A younger boy named Theo, small, shy, and quiet, walked up to their table. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Hi, I just wanted to say thank you, Mason tilted his head. Thank you? For what? Theo's eyes welled up. Those guys who used to bully me, they stopped. They said they don't want to mess with me anymore because of what you did. You made them see things different. Malik's chest tightened. He glanced at Mason, who smiled gently. You don't have to thank us, Theo, just remember. Strength isn't about fighting, it's about knowing who you are. Theo nodded eagerly. I will, he said before running off. For a moment, the twins sat quietly, realizing something deeper. Their story wasn't just about defending themselves anymore. It had become a light for others. That evening, Miss Clara sat with them on the porch as the sun began to set. The golden light washed over the trees, painting the world in soft amber tones. She looked at her grandsons, her voice calm but proud. Do you see what happens when you live with honor? Malik nodded slowly. People start to change. Yes, she said, because kindness is contagious and respect spreads faster than hate if you let it. But life had another surprise waiting. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was sealed in a silver envelope with the emblem of the National Youth Honor Foundation. Miss Clara opened it carefully, her eyes widened as she read aloud. Congratulations, Malik and Mason Lewis have been selected to receive the Youth Bravery and Leadership Award for inspiring unity and respect among students nationwide. The twins froze. Nationwide? Mason whispered. They're giving us an award? Miss Clara nodded, tears forming in her eyes. You've made your family proud, Bray, but more than that, you've made the world remember what grace looks like. The day of the ceremony arrived quickly. It was held in a grand auditorium filled with students. Teachers and reporters, the twins sat quietly beside Miss Clara, nervous but calm. When their names were called, they walked up to the stage together. The host smiled. These two young men reminded us that true courage is not in fighting others, but in conquering one's own anger. The audience applauded loudly. Cameras flashed, Malik and Mason stood tall, humble and grateful. When it was time to speak, Malik stepped forward to the microphone, his voice steady. We didn't set out to be heroes, he said. We just wanted peace. We were taught that silence isn't weakness and it's control, and that every person deserves respect, no matter how they look or where they come from. Mason added softly. We hope our story helps others remember that strength is not measured by how hard you hit, but by how well you forgive. The crowd rose to its feet, clapping thunderously. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. Miss Clara sat in the front row, her heart full. Later that night back home, she hugged them tightly. You've done something special, she whispered. You've turned pain into purpose. The twins looked at each other and smiled. They realized their journey, from being mocked and labeled to being honored, had never been about proving their worth. It had been about showing the world what quiet power truly looks like. As they sat under the stars that night, Mason said softly, Do you think Mom and Dad can see us now? Miss Clara smiled, her eyes glistening. Oh yes, my boys. They're watching and they're proud. The night grew still, and for a long time no one spoke. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from distant houses. The world outside was big and full of noise, but in that small porch light, 3 hearts rested in perfect peace. The journey had changed them all. Not through victory, but through grace, not through fists, but through forgiveness. And in that calm silence, Malik and Mason finally understood what their grandmother had always meant. True strength isn't loud, it doesn't demand attention. It simply shines quietly and changes everything around it. Years passed and Crestwood Middle School had changed. The walls that once echoed with laughter and cruelty now carried something new, respect. The story of Malik and Mason had become a quiet legend. Teachers spoke of it to new students every year, not as gossip but as a lesson. The story of 2 brothers who were mocked, who were labeled jungle kids, and who responded not with fists, but with grace. Malik and Mason had grown taller, stronger and wiser. They were now high school students, mentors to younger kids who looked up to them like heroes. But even as their lives changed, they remained humble, still training in their backyard every morning with Miss Clara, still sweeping the porch, still laughing over tea. Their medals hung quietly on the wall, symbols not of victory, but of discipline and heart. Miss Clara would polish them sometimes, smiling softly. You see these? She'd say, they don't shine because they're gold. They shine because they were earned with honor. One sunny afternoon, the school invited the twins to speak at a special assembly called The Power of Respect. The gym was full. Students, teachers, parents, even Brent, now a senior, sat in the front row waiting. When the brothers walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause, but Malik lifted a hand gently. Signaling for calm, he looked around the room, his eyes kind and steady. "You all know what happened years ago," he began. "But this story isn't about a fight, it's about what came after." Mason stepped forward. "We learned something powerful. You can't control how people treat you, but you can always control how you react." The crowd listened in complete silence, not a whisper, not a cough. "Only the sound of truth," Malik continued. "When people mocked us, we felt pain, but fighting them wasn't the answer. Because real victory isn't about proving you're better. It's about refusing to become bitter." Mason added softly, "We didn't change their minds with anger. We changed them with peace." Brent looked down, his eyes full of emotion, remembering the day that changed him forever. Miss Clara sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly, tears shining in her eyes. Her grandsons were no longer the quiet boys who walked the halls alone. They had become young men who carried dignity like armor. After the speech, the principal stood and said, "These brothers showed us that strength isn't about fists. It's about heart. It's about walking through hate and still choosing kindness." The room filled with applause once again. This time not loud but heartfelt. Later that evening, after the event, Malik and Mason walked home with Miss Clara. The streets glowed under the golden sunset. Children waved at them, some shouting, "Hi, Malik." "Hi, Mason." The twins smiled, waving back when they reached home. Miss Clara sat on the porch, sipping her tea. "You've done what I always hoped you would," she said softly. "You turned pain into purpose. You showed the world that love is the highest form of strength." Mason sat beside her. "It's funny," he said. "All this started because people called us names." Miss Clara chuckled gently. "Sometimes life plants flowers in places where others throw stones." Malik looked at the horizon, where the sky melted into orange and purple. "Do you think the world will ever stop judging people for how they look?" he asked. Miss Clara thought for a moment. "Maybe not completely," she said. "But as long as there are hearts like yours, the world will always have hope." The twins nodded, the soft evening breeze brushing against their faces. Behind them, the sound of kids laughing echoed through the street, and Malik smiled. "It's different now," he said. "The school, the people, everything feels lighter." "Yes," Miss Clara said, "because light always wins even when it starts small." As night fell, Malik and Mason walked to the backyard, where they had trained for years. The old wooden boards creaked beneath their feet. The air smelled like earth and memory. Mason bowed slightly and Malik followed. They began moving, slow, graceful, focused. Every movement was a reflection of their journey. Pain, patience, forgiveness, strength. Miss Clara watched from the porch, her eyes full of pride. The moonlight wrapped around them, making their silhouettes glow like quiet flames in the dark. When they finished, they stood still. Facing each other, Malik whispered, "We did it." Mason smiled. "No, Grandma did it." They both laughed softly, their voices blending with the night wind. In that peaceful silence under the stars, their story found its ending. No cheers, no noise. Just the soft rhythm of two hearts that had learned the true meaning of power. A power that never needed to shout. A power that forgave when the world mocked. A power that taught everyone that even those labeled jungle kids could become the calmest warriors. And so the legend of the Black Twins lived on, not as fighters, but as symbols of grace, wisdom, and the quiet strength that can change the world, one act of kindness at a time.